Today we're going over the slave who almost brought Rome to its knees. He had no army, no funding, no noble birth, no formal training in tactics or strategy. What he had was a wooden practice sword, a kitchen knife, and 70 other men who were also about to die for entertainment. 2 years later, he commanded a force of 70,000 people. He had defeated 9 separate Roman armies, including forces led by sitting Roman consuls, the most powerful elected officials in the entire republic. He marched the length of Italy twice. Rome, the single most powerful military force on the face of the earth, was, for a brief moment, genuinely terrified that this one escaped gladiator was going to march on the capital itself. His name was Spartacus, and this is how a man who was bought and sold as property came within a hair's breadth of breaking the Roman Republic. Here's the first honest thing we need to say about Spartacus. We don't actually know that much about him. No contemporary account of his life survives. Everything historians know comes from Roman writers Plutarch, Appian, Sallust, who were writing decades after the fact, from the perspective of the people who eventually crushed him. Nobody wrote down what Spartacus actually wanted, in his own words. We're reconstructing a hero or a villain, depending who you ask, entirely through the eyes of the empire that killed him. What we do know is this. Spartacus was born sometime around 109 BC in Thrace, a region covering parts of modern-day Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. The Thracians had a complicated relationship with Rome. Sometimes allies, sometimes enemies, frequently both within the same decade. Several ancient sources suggest that Spartacus actually served as an auxiliary soldier in the Roman army at some point. If true, this matters enormously because it means that by the time he ends up in chains, he already understands exactly how Roman legions fight, how they're organized, and most importantly, how they think. The sources disagree on exactly what happens next, but the general shape of the story is this. Spartacus deserts or rebels or gets captured fighting against Rome. Accounts differ. What's consistent across every version is the result. He's captured. And once Rome captures you and decides you're not worth ransoming or executing outright, there's one place left for a strong, capable man to go. The arena. In 73 BC, Spartacus is purchased by a man named Lentulus Batiatus, who owns a gladiator school, a ludus, in the city of Capua, about 130 miles south of Rome. Now, if your only reference point for gladiators is Hollywood, you might be picturing something glamorous. It wasn't. Gladiators were property. They were investments. Batiatus didn't own Spartacus because he liked him. He owned him because a skilled fighter who could survive in the arena was a profitable business asset, the same way a prize racehorse might be today. That said, gladiators did occupy a strange, contradictory position. Historian Barry Strauss describes them as having a kind of grim privilege compared to other slaves. Better food, physical training, occasionally even fame and the adoration of crowds. The catch, of course, is that all of this was in service of one specific outcome: dying in front of an audience for sport. Spartacus is trained as what the Romans called a murmillo, a heavily armored gladiator who fought with a large rectangular shield and a short, broad-bladed sword called a gladius. It's worth noting that this is the exact same basic kit carried by Roman legionary infantry. The empire had, without realizing it, spent considerable time and money turning Spartacus into someone who fought exactly like one of their own soldiers. They would come to regret this. In the summer of 73 BC, Spartacus and a group of fellow gladiators decide they are done waiting to die for entertainment. The plot is discovered before they're fully ready, which forces their hand. With no time to gather proper weapons, around 70 gladiators grab whatever is within reach. Accounts specifically mention kitchen utensils, cleavers, and skewers from the school's cooking area, and fight their way out of the ludus. 70 men, armed with knives meant for chopping vegetables, against an empire that, at its absolute peak, would command the loyalty of dozens of legions and control the entire Mediterranean world. It should have ended in an afternoon. Instead, the escaped gladiators stumble across several wagons loaded with actual gladiatorial weapons and armor, likely being transported to another school or arena, and seize them. Within hours, 70 desperate men with kitchen knives have become 70 armed and at least partially armored fighters, led by men who have spent years training specifically to kill efficiently in single combat. They retreat to high ground for safety. Specifically, to the slopes of a large, quiet, dormant mountain overlooking the Bay of Naples. Mount Vesuvius. Rome's initial response tells you everything about how seriously they took this threat at first. Not very. This wasn't treated as a military emergency. It was treated as a policing problem, a glorified slave hunt, no different from chasing down a runaway. The Senate dispatches the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber with a hastily assembled militia force, somewhere around 3,000 men, none of them particularly elite Roman soldiers. Glaber's strategy is simple. Surround the mountain, block the single known path up to where Spartacus and his men are camped, and starve them out. No need for a pitched battle. Just wait. It's a reasonable plan. It also completely fails to account for the fact that the slopes of Vesuvius were covered in wild grapevines. Spartacus has his men weave the vines into ropes. Under cover of darkness, they use these makeshift ropes to climb down an unguarded section of the cliff face. The side Glaber's men hadn't bothered blocking, because it looked unclimbable. It wasn't. The escaped gladiators circle around behind Glaber's encampment and launch a surprise attack from the rear, into a Roman force that believed itself to be safely besieging a starving, trapped enemy above them. The militia, caught completely off guard, is routed. Most of them are killed. Word of this spreads through the region with predictable speed and predictable consequences. More slaves, field hands, household servants, herders, start abandoning their posts and flocking to join Spartacus. Every farm laborer who walks away from their owner to pick up a sword is both a new soldier for Spartacus and a direct, visible insult to the entire Roman social order, which depends on slaves staying exactly where they're told to stay. Rome sends more forces. 2 more praetors, commanding their own detachments, are dispatched and defeated in turn, one of them so thoroughly beaten that Spartacus personally captures his horse. By the end of the first year, what began as 70 men with stolen kitchen knives has become an army that Roman commanders no longer feel comfortable underestimating. This is where the story stops being a prison break and starts being something closer to an actual war. Spartacus's forces don't operate as a single unified mass. The army effectively splits its leadership between Spartacus himself and a Gallic gladiator named Crixus, alongside another Gallic leader, Enemaus. They control different sections of the growing rebel force, conducting raids across the rich farming region of Campania, looting weapons, supplies, and, most critically, recruiting still more slaves from the plantations they passed through. Over the winter of 73 to 72 BC, instead of pushing their advantage immediately, the rebels do something genuinely disciplined. They stop and they train. New recruits, farmhands and household slaves with no military experience whatsoever, are drilled and equipped using captured Roman weapons and armor. Spartacus, drawing on whatever knowledge he picked up either as a Roman auxiliary or simply as an extremely sharp tactical mind, begins shaping a disorganized mob into something that can stand against trained legions. By the most commonly cited estimates, the combined rebel forces swell to somewhere around 70,000 people. It's worth being precise about what that number actually represents. This isn't 70,000 soldiers. It includes women, children, the elderly, and the wounded who'd attached themselves to what was, by this point, less an army and more a moving society in open revolt against Rome. But the able-bodied fighting core of that group has, by now, proven something undeniable. They can take on Roman military units and win. In the spring of 72 BC, the Roman Senate, now genuinely alarmed, dispatches both consuls for the year, Lucius Gellius and Gnaeus Lentulus, each commanding their own legions. These aren't praetors with hastily gathered militia anymore. These are the 2 highest-ranking elected officials of the entire Roman Republic, leading actual consular legions. Things do not go the way Rome hoped. Crixus's portion of the rebel force is intercepted and defeated near Mount Garganus. A real defeat with Crixus himself killed in the fighting. But Spartacus, commanding the main body of the army, turns and defeats Gellius's legion. Then he turns again and defeats Lentulus's force as well. 2 consuls, 2 legions, both beaten within the same campaign season by a man who 2 years earlier had been training to die in an arena for the entertainment of the people who now desperately wanted him dead. With Crixus dead, Spartacus reportedly executes several hundred captured Roman soldiers, forcing them to fight one another to the death as gladiators. A brutal, deliberate piece of symbolism. The empire had spent years forcing slaves to kill each other for sport. Spartacus briefly hands that exact same horror back to Rome. Then he does something that historians still argue about today. Instead of continuing to press his advantage in central Italy, Spartacus marches his enormous following northward, toward the Alps. The most common interpretation is straightforward. Spartacus wanted out. Once his people crossed the Alps into Cisalpine Gaul and beyond, they could scatter to their various homelands, Thracians back toward Thrace, Gauls back toward Gaul, and simply disappear as free people, leaving Roman territory behind entirely. He defeats yet another Roman force near Mutina, clearing the path north. Freedom, by every reasonable measure, is within reach. And then his own army says no. According to several ancient accounts, Spartacus's followers, flush with victory after victory, increasingly confident that they could simply defeat Rome outright rather than flee from it, refused to leave Italy. Spartacus, against what several historians believe was his own better judgment, turns the army back south. It's one of the more human and more tragic details in the entire story. The man with the clearest tactical mind in the conflict may have understood, earlier than anyone else, that the rebellion's best possible outcome was escape rather than conquest. But leading 70,000 people isn't the same as commanding 70,000 soldiers. Even Spartacus, it seems, couldn't simply order freedom into being if his own people wanted to keep fighting instead. So south they go. At one point, the army marches within striking distance of Rome itself, close enough that the city, the actual capital of the Republic, genuinely fears a direct assault. Spartacus, for reasons that remain debated, doesn't attack the city. He turns away again, moving back into southern Italy. By now, Rome has stopped treating this as a policing problem. The Senate hands command of the entire war effort to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Roman history, and a political rival to the rising star Pompey the Great. Crassus inherits an army that has already been humiliated multiple times, and he deals with that problem in the most Roman way imaginable, by reviving an ancient and horrifying disciplinary practice called decimation. 1 in every 10 soldiers, chosen by lot from units that had performed poorly, is executed by their own comrades. It's a brutal message. Failure against Spartacus is no longer survivable, even if the enemy doesn't kill you. Crassus then does something more strategically useful than simply terrifying his own men. He builds. He raises additional legions, totaling somewhere around 8 to 10 legions under his command, a force the rebels have never faced anything close to in scale. Spartacus, attempting to escape the noose tightening around him, makes a desperate move. He tries to negotiate passage to Sicily with a group of pirates, hoping to ferry his army across the Strait of Messina and reignite the same kind of slave uprisings that had previously rocked that island decades earlier. The pirates take payment and abandon him anyway. Trapped in the toe of Italy, the region known as Bruttium, modern Calabria, with no ships and Crassus's legions closing in, Spartacus is now boxed into geography that no amount of tactical brilliance can simply outmaneuver. Crassus, increasingly worried that the Senate is about to recall 2 other prominent commanders, Pompey from Spain and Lucullus from the east, to finish the job and steal his glory, pushes for a decisive engagement before either of them can arrive. Spartacus, reportedly recognizing the danger that Pompey's reinforcements represent, attempts to negotiate a separate peace directly with Crassus. The offer is rejected outright. Rome has no interest in negotiating with an escaped slave, regardless of how many legions he's defeated. In the early months of 71 BC, in the mountainous region near Pedalia, the rebel army's confidence reasserts itself. They win one more engagement against the vanguard of Crassus's pursuing forces. It will be their last victory. What follows is the end. Cornered, with no escape route remaining and Crassus's full strength finally brought to bear, Spartacus's army splits during the chaos of the final engagement. Some accounts suggest internal disputes over strategy in these final, desperate days. The Gallic and Germanic contingents are defeated first. Then Spartacus, with whatever remained of his core force, makes his last stand. The ancient historian Appian describes Spartacus in the final battle, deliberately trying to fight his way directly toward Crassus himself. One last attempt to end this the way it perhaps should have ended from the start, gladiator against the man who commanded his death. Wounded, driven to one knee, but according to the accounts, He keeps fighting from the ground until he's finally surrounded and killed. His body was never recovered. Among tens of thousands of dead on that battlefield, no one could say for certain which corpse belonged to the man who had, for 2 years, made the Roman Republic genuinely afraid. The war's conclusion is as brutal as its conduct. Some 6,000 surviving rebels are captured and crucified by Crassus's order, their bodies lining the entire length of the Appian Way, the main road connecting Capua to Rome itself. It was meant as a message that would be impossible to misread by anyone traveling that road for years afterward. This is what happens to slaves who imagine themselves capable of defeating Rome. Pompey's forces, returning from Spain, intercept a separate group of roughly 5,000 rebels attempting to flee north and kill them as well. And then, in one of history's all-time great acts of credit stealing, Pompey sends a message to the Senate implying that he was the one who actually ended the war, despite arriving only in time to mop up fleeing survivors. Crassus, understandably, never forgives him for it. Both men ride the political capital from the war's end into the consulship the following year, setting both of their careers on a trajectory that would eventually help reshape the entire Roman Republic. Spartacus himself gets no monument, no proper burial, no recorded final resting place. For a man who came astonishingly close to becoming one of the great disruptors of ancient history, the Roman historical record treats him largely as a problem that was successfully, violently solved. It would be centuries before Spartacus got anything resembling the recognition his actual achievements warranted. The Enlightenment philosopher Voltaire would later call the Third Servile War the only just war in history. Karl Marx considered Spartacus a personal hero, describing him as a great general, noble character, and real representative of the ancient proletariat. Revolutionary movements across multiple centuries and continents would invoke his name, including the German Spartacus League that rose up in the chaos following the First World War. What's genuinely remarkable, stripped of all the later political mythology built around him, is simply this. A man with no army, no resources, no formal command experience, and absolutely no path to victory by any conventional measure, took 70 desperate men armed with kitchen knives and built a force that defeated 9 separate Roman commands over the course of 2 years. He marched the length of Italy. He made the most powerful empire in the ancient world genuinely afraid for its own capital. He lost in the end. Rome was always going to win that fight eventually. The math of an empire with effectively unlimited soldiers against a rebellion with a hard ceiling on its numbers was never going to bend the other way forever. But for 2 years, an enslaved gladiator who was supposed to die quietly for entertainment instead became the single greatest internal threat the Roman Republic had faced in generations. Some wars are remembered because of who won them. This one is remembered because of who almost did.